if you're on the East Coast like Judith. I am here today with Judith Bernholc. She is the head of customer success at Arkatechture in Washington, D.C. So we're going to chat about what customer success means, how they measure it, and any tips that she might have to help you improve customer success at your organization. Hi, Judith. Thanks for joining me.
Hey, Andy. So glad to be here.
Yeah, why don't you go ahead and do a quick introduction?
Yeah, absolutely. My name is Judith Bernholc, and I am about 8, 9 months into my head of customer success role at Arkatechture. Before I was head of customer success here, I spent about, it's hard to think back with COVID time, but I think 5 to 6 years in sales and sales management at technology companies. So first at Lenovo, at a hardware company, I was there for about 2 years right out of college, and then spent about 5 years at Tableau afterwards, and then came to Arkatechture to do customer success.
And how'd you kind of get onto the journey of customer success then?
So I think when your sales and customer success are actually, I think, very, very similar. And there's a
Hmm.
lot of skills that translate from the sales aspect of working, being client facing, having conversations, determining where there's a problem and where your product can potentially solve that problem.
Yep.
And I really enjoyed diving deep into those business problems. And as you know, Tableau can really address any data can help address any, problem that you might have. You can start to use it to solve it. And that's what I really enjoyed doing with my customers.
Hmm.
And then I get really excited, and there's this great feeling of, oh, they signed the deal and we just sold them Tableau. And there's like this really great feeling. And then I think, and a lot of times you'll reach back out to that customer later in the year. And I always took it personally if they're like, yeah, unfortunately, we just haven't used it that much. As I'm trying to get that
Right.
second deal, they're like, oh, we haven't really used it the way that we wanted to, or
Mm.
we haven't gotten around to it. And so throughout the sales process, I'd always try to bring in implementation partners, folks to help, but I just found myself being like really gravitated towards post sale. I want to continue to solve these problems.
Mm.
And I don't want to just walk away at this point. I want to continue to kind of be there and consult. So I found myself just being really gratified by hearing that they found success, and really disappointed when finding
Mm.
out, hey, this is really just shelfware. I felt like I wanted to go and solve that problem. So
Okay.
started looking for, success, and that's how I got myself here.
That's great. Yeah, it sounds like kind of the classic sales mentality. I'm just going to get the sale and then move on to the next one, right? So, which isn't really fair to your customers if you want them to be long term customers.
Yeah, and I
So,
think there's
mhm,
the role, right? There's
yep.
there's sales where it's like, hey, my role is to bring new business in. There's not a lot of bandwidth to go and help them, so you try your best to set them up for success, give them all of the tools, an implementation partner, the blueprint, for example, but
Hmm.
sometimes your customer does need someone to hold them accountable or walk
Mm.
them through the process and just kind of be there. And that's why customer success, I think, exists, is to
Hmm.
help post sale continue to push them along that journey.
Hmm. And how would you define customer success then?
I would say it's really focusing internally and externally on the entire customer experience to ensure
Hmm.
that they're getting the most value out of your product or your offering. Kind of in summation, it's all about value and
Okay.
making sure that you're delivering that value.
And how do you measure that then?
That's kind of an interesting question. I think there's a lot of that was actually one of my worries moving into customer success is
Right.
sales. You're either you meet your quota or you don't meet your quota, and you can see exactly how close you got. And in customer success, there are some hard metrics like that, like renewals. What is your renewal percentage rate? There are things like NPS scores that right now we're not really doing because we're kind of a smaller company. So there's different ways to measure it. I think the best way is if they're renewing the platform, and if you have a good idea on the type of outcomes that they're getting, and if you're delivering on those outcomes. And then there are lagging indicators like expansion. If a customer is expanding their use of your product, you're finding success. And if you're able to get some really great advocates within your customer base, you're also finding success. So there's net revenue retention, there's additional ARR, but there's also some qualitative things. And I think that's the beauty of customer success is you've got to blend the qualitative pieces with the quantitative.
So what do you do when a customer doesn't want to renew, or there's problems with the customer that are sort of, you know, everything you said sounds great if a customer is happy, but what if a customer is not happy? What does the customer success team do in those cases?
I think that there's a lot that you can start to dissect. And I think the first thing is being really honest or open to feedback, right? Not taking any type of criticism personally, but truly trying to put yourself in the customer's shoes and understanding areas that you can or your company can take ownership on making on where maybe you missed the mark. And it could be it was just misaligned expectations. I think that's one of the biggest pieces of setting up customers for success is really letting them know what they should expect. And if their expectations are misaligned with what you can deliver, that's obviously going to provide some friction. So as soon as you notice that kind of frustration or they're not happy, it might be diving into where those expectations were misaligned, taking ownership for how they got misaligned, because it's definitely something that we should be proactively communicating. And then also resetting them and letting them know here's where we can help, here's where we can't help, right? Here's what we can do, here's what we can't do. Here are all the things we're willing to do. And if it still isn't the right fit because they need more than what we can provide or whatever the maybe our product isn't solving the problem that they wanted to solve, whatever that may be, it's okay for a customer to not renew if it's not the right product for them. But we're really hopeful that we're doing a great job through the sales process. I think our team does a fantastic job so that we are able to solve those problems. It's just realigning with expectations and setting that line and then following through. If you say you're going to do something, do it. And it's again not taking it personally or getting too heated in the moment because it's a tough conversation. But people are just people, and they're trying to get value out of their investment, and so they want to work with you to do that.
So your customer success team is both internal and externally focused then. Um, so how does that differ then from a center of excellence? Because I always think of a center of excellence being kind of internal only. What do you see as the difference between the two?
Yeah, I think it's funny. Center of excellence, I think, started to come out through like the data analytics world, and it was a
Hmm.
phrase that was tossed around a lot. And I worked a little bit more with smaller companies when I was at Tableau, so I didn't have too many customers that set up center of excellences. But I see it more as a company-driven community internally, trying
Right.
to drive a specific culture, trying to solve specific problems, setting up SMEs for different business problems.
Hmm.
And then I see customer success as externally focused, internally focused, but ever changing and not about one particular topic.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, but yeah, I don't have too much experience with center of excellences,
Okay.
so would be curious,
Hmm.
how you see it as internal. Is there anything else that you would add to that description?
Yeah, I think you're pretty accurate with that internal description. Yeah, it's kind of like the internal evangelist for whatever
Hmm.
your product is. Yeah. So who are your customers inside the company then? Like which teams would be your customers? Is it just sales?
Oh, it's sales, it's marketing, it's product, and it's support.
Okay.
So it and it's implementation. So honestly, it runs the gamut.
Yeah.
It's definitely across the board because if you're not directly serving the customer, the work that you're doing will eventually serve the customer. So it really is across the board.
Hmm.
And there's some teams that we work closer with than others, like support, for example, or product, for example.
Okay. And why did architecture need a customer success program?
So I came in, and I think one of the key things that makes customer success so valuable is that it is the best way to maintain and grow revenue. So
Hmm.
especially as most companies have pivoted or are pivoting to software as a service, that is only as valuable if your customers continue to renew. And also, happy customers continue to expand,
Right.
and they also lend referrals. So it's a great way to drive the bottom line in a different way than just traditional sales. Two, you've got to have kind of an ear to the customer to make sure that you're building. We're at early stages here, couple years into our SaaS offering. Make sure that you're building for the customers' needs today and their needs in the future. And we're a lot of the clients that we serve are credit unions.
Okay.
And we have a lot of folks internally that have experience in the financial industry space, that have worked with a lot of credit unions. But unless you're really diving deep, you may diverge paths into what you think is important and what is actually important. So I think it's twofold. It's growing revenue and then ensuring that you're building the right product for your business so it can continue to grow and find those net new customers as well.
Okay, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's kind of the old adage of what is it? It's cheaper to maintain a customer than to get a new one, right? That kind of
Yep.
idea. Yeah.
And it
Okay.
makes it less expensive to get new customers if you're finding those new customers through referrals,
Right.
through
Right.
other happy customers. That makes that acquisition process a little bit less expensive because
Right.
you're kind of getting word of mouth that doesn't really cost much besides a happy
Yeah.
customer.
Yeah. Yeah. And what was your influence on the way that the customer success program was set up?
Yeah, so I came in and I came from two pretty big companies. So I came from Lenovo, which was pretty big, and then Tableau, which was 4,000, then 50,000 when we got acquired by Salesforce. So I came in and there was a lot to learn. I was very used to, Lord, this is my first, we're about 55 or so employees. So this was my
Right.
first kind of small company that I worked for. And at the start, I thought it was really important to just listen and learn. It's so easy to jump in and be like, well, at Tableau or at Lenovo, this is how we did things. And there were some times that I might have spoken up and been like, we should do things this way, but I didn't take a moment to be like, what has everyone else
Right.
accomplished before I got here? Why is it built the way that it's built? And really focusing on like, what do I need to learn before I start to put on the customer hat and start to recommend things? So I think it took about 4 or so months to really get my footing, understand each department, understand all of
Right.
the inner workings, what was done before. And then it was starting to find some of the low-hanging fruit of how could we make the customer experience better. So it was just immediately like, hey, can we revamp our knowledge base to be a little bit more customer centric, a little bit more customer facing? Can we, change our documentation here? And then also, I need to introduce myself to all of our customers and start
Right.
to understand, have interviews with them, but also understand what their goals are. So it was at the start a lot of learning. And now, kind of in the second half of my first year at Arkatechture, it's trying to find the immediate things to change and then the long-term things to change. And that's been pretty exciting.
Great. So how is the customer success team, how does it fit into kind of the org structure at your company? And then kind of what are the roles or responsibilities within your team?
Yeah, good question. So I report to the COO, and
Okay.
the COO also oversees the support team
Okay.
and a couple of other teams. And then I've got one customer success manager on my team, Jacob, and he reports to me. And we kind of go from the CEO to the CEO. But what I would say is that we're more of a flat organization. So I find myself sitting in support meetings, implementation meetings, and product meetings. And I think it's just around making sure that you're included. And what's great is that Arkatechture sees the value in customer success. So they are proactive, but especially in my first 3 to 6 months, it was, yeah, throw me on that. I want to learn. Throw me on this. I want to
Right.
learn. And
Right.
now I'm just a part of these cadences. And sometimes it's like, they're working on a project, doesn't really involve me. Let me know if anything comes up that I can help with. But, there's not other departments reporting to me. It's really kind of a standalone department that we just go really, really wide on,
Okay.
and make sure that we're involved and that the customer's voice is being heard across implementation, support, and sales.
Okay. So you were almost having to do a bit of kind of like selling your group or an awareness campaign within the company.
Yeah, I would say so
Yeah.
because it's small. It doesn't feel, like there's too much campaigns, but you do need to insert
Right.
yourself, and
Yeah.
you also should have some sort of perspective that you're adding. And that was another thing that I had to learn is where does it make sense after 3 to 4 months to start to say, hey, this is the way that I'm thinking about it from the
Hmm.
customer's perspective. And really, I'm a part of so many Slack channels, and it's just about if you see something and you're like, I have a question of what that would actually mean, or I need to advocate for this customer here, just jumping on it, and giving your perspective and
Hmm.
point of view and not being shy and saying, well, they didn't ask me for my opinion, so I should stay out of it, but
Right.
really just
Right.
jumping into those conversations.
And do you use Slack then as your primary communication with other teams?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Slack all the time. Yeah.
Okay. Great. Yeah, it's good to have those tools. Are much much better than using email back and forth.
I
Yeah.
honestly couldn't imagine. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. How do you go about onboarding and educating your customers about the customer success program?
Yeah, so when I joined, one of the first things that we realized needed to happen was there should be an introduction of customer success at the tail end of the sales process. At the tail
Okay.
end, there's reviewing the legal documents.
Hmm.
It's essentially pretty much closed, but there's just some due diligence that needs to be done, and
Hmm.
that's where it makes sense for customer success to be
Okay.
introduced.
Yep.
One, to learn a little bit more about the value that they're looking to get, and kind of just be a part of that initial conversation. It just provides
Hmm.
so much context. And then two, post sale, instead of just hopping to implementation and then hopping to support, you kind of have one person that is someone that you can reach out to throughout the entire post sale process.
Right.
So typically, end of the sales cycle, getting introduced, talking about my role is to really help you get the most value out of this product as possible. And then as they go through implementation, we've started to sprinkle little things about how can you prepare your organization for the change that's coming. So outside of
Okay.
just technically setting this thing up, how can we work together to already be thinking about adoption?
Hmm. Hmm.
And then after that piece, setting up monthly or quarterly syncs with the right
Hmm.
stakeholders. But it
Okay.
is important to get in there early so that you have all of the information that you get at the end of the sales cycle, that it might be a lot harder to get 6 months down the line.
True. Yeah. So it sounds like, because you're part of the sales cycle, then it's almost like your little bonus that the customer gets at the end that they didn't really have to pay for, right? You're
Yeah.
part of the solution they're buying from Arkatechture.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it. Is this is it really showcases at the end of the cycle, like, we are committed to your success.
Right.
We're not just trying to get the signature here. We really are, like, this is a long-term partnership,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
this is going to be a long-term solution for you. And I think just introducing customer success at that phase is extremely important to build
Hmm.
additional trust with the customer.
Great. And so this was a question. I believe this came from somebody, but I don't have a name written next to it.
Okay.
Um, what impact has your customer success program had on customer loyalty? Because that's one of the key. That's kind of like if you don't succeed in that, then you're in
Hmm.
big trouble, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think loyalty is kind of like an emotional term of, like, that I'm sticking with Judith and I'm
Right.
sticking with Arkatechture, right? So I think it's one, building those relationships and having open communication about, like you mentioned before, issues that might be coming up.
Hmm.
And having and building that trust through solving those issues together. So that does have a good effect. And then I think I get to hear about the great things that they're doing, the ROI that they're getting out of the product, and then get one another almost excited about it, and
Hmm.
have them go and preach their success to other folks. So I think it's about when I hear loyalty, to me, it's all about the relationship. And
Yeah.
if you don't have someone that's there listening, taking your feedback, implementing it internally, hearing about your struggles, maybe coming up with new packages because of those struggles, then eventually you're not going to feel heard and you'll walk away. So I
Hmm.
think it's just continuing to have consistent cadences with our customers and having open and honest conversations about their experience and what they would like to improve and what they absolutely love.
So you have those kind of regular check-ins with clients then, right? Or with customers?
Yeah, I
Yeah,
do.
okay. And then how do they give you feedback? So obviously they can give you feedback during those calls. But what if they need to give you feedback, in between those? How do they get that to you?
Just an email, right?
Okay.
If there's something that's coming up, if there's an issue that's coming up, then I've noticed you're not gonna typically. I mean, best case scenario, you'll get an email that's saying things are going awesome, right? But that's not usually the emails
But
that you get. You'll get yeah.
yeah, you only get the bad emails.
Exactly. So if there's something that's happening between calls, that's an email and that's an immediate, coordination between me,
Right.
internal teams to kind of address what's going on.
Mhm.
But during those dedicated time slots, I really try to find the wins, find the things that are working, see what they
Mhm.
are
Mhm.
excited about. That's what you usually have to pry for because it's just not common to be like, hey, we just talked about Slack. Should I email someone at Slack to say, I'm loving
Right.
it, right? That's not common, but getting on the phone, hearing about that, you can ask those questions and kind of extrapolate that. But
Yeah.
always open. My role is very customer facing,
Okay.
so I typically will get emails from them
Yeah.
when anything pops up.
So how much firefighting do you have to do?
How much firefighting? I think it depends.
Because
I think it
talking about
depends.
the emails you get are usually firefights, so
Yeah,
or
and
they
and
can be.
it can be. I would say that not too much firefighting. I would say that you also need to have a good way of defining what is a fire and how to extinguish sparks quickly. So
Right.
if you immediately see there's misaligned expectations, that's a quick email. Hey, this is what we can provide. This is what is expected, and that usually can
Right.
solve any type of. I just don't know when I'm going to get a response on this, like pretty quickly. So it's there's probably 20% of that sort of thing, and I think it in a way, it's almost good because it shows how reliant folks are on your product, but
Mhm.
on the other side, any type of issue that pops up stops them from getting to their goals. So, always looking to reduce that.
Mhm.
Always, if you're doing 50%, 60% firefighting, that's not a great experience for the customer nor customer success because it's
Yeah.
stopping you to have deeper conversations. So, I'd say we have a healthy amount of firefighting, and um, thankfully, I think we've started to realize what are the common issues, how can
Mhm.
we add things to our documentation. So really taking like the normal things that are coming up and trying to address them at a larger scale so that they don't come up in the future,
Right.
is really important.
Okay. So thinking about getting into a career in customer success, what's a good skill set for people to bring into that type of role if they're interested?
I would say empathy is
Mm.
is kind of number one, really hearing, listening, understanding, and empathy on both sides. You can be empathetic towards the customer, but also you need to be understanding of the internal teams and all of the
Mm.
things and priorities that the internal teams are working on, and understanding where you fit in or where maybe you might be asking too much and you can take some of that off of their plate to help the customer experience. So empathy on both sides. I also think for someone looking to get into customer success, being revenue minded and revenue focused,
Mhm.
coming from
Okay.
sales into customer success, that was kind of already something in my mind. But you want your company to see customer success not as a cost center, but as critical to growth. And as soon as you make
Okay.
yourself critical to the growth of the company, that opens up, your
You're suddenly
opinion
more
matters
important.
more in those.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Suddenly you become more important if you
Yeah.
can contribute to the growth.
Yeah.
So those are
Yeah.
two really big things that I think
Okay.
about when I think about customer success.
And are there any particular things that help or hinder people? Like, let's say you're interviewing somebody for a role on your team. What are some things that will kind of help or hinder them when they're, trying to get into your team?
I think I really, really like curiosity. And it's pretty.
Mhm.
And I remember when I first started my career, I hated not knowing what something meant. So I would just pretend like I knew it, and that wasn't the best. Like whether it's an acronym, whether it's
Mm.
anything really, a process. And so I really like it when someone pauses. "Hey, what is that? What does NRR mean? You don't need to go into the interview and immediately say, like I'm not going to dismiss you because you don't know what net revenue retention means, but if you ask
Right.
that question immediately, I'm keyed. You want to learn, you're willing to
Right.
ask
Right.
questions, you're ready to be curious. So I would say that's definitely something that I look for. And then I think having a steady hand
Okay.
in those situations, because like I said, it's easy to get caught up in the small things, and anything can become a fire if you let it become a fire. Right.
Right.
So trying to get a good understanding of how do you handle kind of competing priorities. Prioritization is huge. And how do you handle when like negative things come up? Are you comfortable with confrontation? If you're not comfortable with confrontation, if you're not comfortable with hard conversations, customer success will be tricky because you are actually there to hear that and have those conversations. That's a huge
Hmm.
part of your job.
Okay.
So being comfortable there.
Great. Looks like we've had one question come in on the comments here. What's most important for a customer?
I think it's that they get more than what they invested in your product,
Mm,
right? And then beyond that, that it's great to use and that there's a great community. But I think at the end of the day, they bought your product to solve a problem that's more
right.
expensive than your product, and making sure that they're getting that. And
Hmm.
also, I would say dynamically solving problems. If something else
Right.
comes up, how can your product address that as well? Or do you have a
Mm,
limited scope? And as long as you do that, you're doing it great. Kind of depends on the product, but always looking for more opportunities to make an impact in their business, I would say is
okay.
important.
Great. Well, thank you very much for your time, Judith. It's been a pleasure talking to you and learning a bit more about customer success. For those that are watching, if you enjoyed it, please share it with other people after the recordings are done. Give it a like, give it a comment, whatever would be helpful to help us educate people a bit more about customer success. And if you've made it all the way to the end, leave us a smiley face emoji so we know that you made it to the end. And yeah, thank you, Judith.
Andy, this was great. Thanks so much for having me. And if anyone wants to talk about customer success, I recently made the transition, so feel free to reach out to me. I'm always happy to chat.
Fantastic. All right. Have a good day.
Great.
All
Thanks
right.
all.
Bye.